Tantor Audio, a division of Recorded Books, presents Night's Fire by S.J. Himes, narrated by Joel Leslie. Forward. Much of this world is based off of medieval Europe and medieval England in terms of objects, tools, armor, clothing, etc. The royal sigil of Kentaine is borrowed from the flag of Wales. I include some words that are no longer in use today, but are accurate for the time period in which this book is loosely set. Context has been provided around the words for better comprehension. Thank you, Miranda, for coming up with the book and series title. All of mine sucked. And thank you to Alison of Royal Editing Services. She helped me find my inner medieval fangirl. 1. A dragon? That's unlikely. Gawain leaned back in the chair, stretching out his feet, wishing he could remove his heavy boots. A long day in the training yard with the new recruit left him exhausted, and he wasn't sure if the spring mud in the expansive yard or the absolute raw ineptitude of the recruits left him the weariest. A clump of mud fell off one of his boots and thumped to the floor in the Queen's study. Dragons haven't been seen in nearly 100 years. Queen Elise lifted a scroll, the red seal broken, and handed it to him. Her long blue dress whispered over the floor, the silks draping in a majestic manner. Everything his sister did was majestic. Her crown might be heavy, but her spine was made of iron. She daintily sidestepped the mud and paced while Gawain unrolled the parchment scroll and read the missive from one of his knights, a trustworthy man who was assigned to the northern border villages a few years before. Arvern was an experienced warrior, and not prone to fits of whimsy. "A dragon sighted in the hills outside of Morvain," Gawain murmured. "Livestock is missing, and a hunting party sent after it came back heavily injured, and reporting nightmarish tales of a great beast with a scaly hide and breathing fire." Gawain looked back to his sister, and he lifted a brow. "No one died?"
3 hunters were burned, and the injuries are severe,"
Elise sighed. Worry creased her otherwise smooth brow, and her dark green eyes were clouded, fears he understood better than most buried in their depths. His elder by a handful of years, she had always confided in him, even when they were children.
"Along with mismatched descriptions of the beast in question, their stories are inconsistent. The only things that are certain are the missing livestock and the injuries to the hunters. I'm sending a healer and a contingent of soldiers to Morvain, and I want you to lead the mission."
Gawain quirked a brow at his sister, but as the older sibling she was impervious to his typically formidable stare. "I'll go, but I wonder why you're sending me."
"If it is a dragon, I'd like to avoid mass panic and mobs of frightened villagers killing anything in their path into the hills. By sending my brother, along with some of our best soldiers, I am trying to stamp out any mob mentality disasters."
Gawain smirked and carefully rose to his feet, handing the scroll back to his sister. "I'd rather take a mage along instead of a healer. Tristan is a powerful one, and a capable healer who can manage traumatic injuries as well. We may need the support if we come face to face with a being that can wield magic. What do you want me to do about the dragon?"
"I trust your judgment. See if you can't figure out what's going on. If dragons are returning to our lands, I want to avoid conflict."
Elise gestured to her desk, the wide surface littered with scrolls and leather-bound books. A large, heavy ring with a deep, blood-red ruby glittered from her left ring finger, the crest of their family emblazoned within the wide band of silver.
"Our chronicles tell of intelligent beings with the ability to speak and powerful magics. I don't want to start a war with the dragons if they are returning to our lands, and I don't want our people killing intelligent beings as if they are animals."
"Then I need to leave as soon as possible. Preferably before this evening." Gawain leaned down and pressed a kiss to his sister's cheek. She took it with a soft smile and a brief hug. "I best get started."
"Be careful, little brother,"
Elise called after him as he strode for the far door leading from the Queen's chambers.
"Bring me back a dragon."
Her words were teasing, but he would, if it was at all possible. A dragon in Kentaine. Something that hadn't happened in over 100 years would be a spectacle indeed. The large wooden doors carved with the royal crest of Kentaine were opened by 2 royal guards in their red and black armour, velvet tabards bearing a red dragon in flight on a black field rustling when they bowed briefly as he passed. Morvain, a small village at the foot of the mountain range that made up the Kingdom of Kentaine's northern and eastern borders, was a 3-day ride to the northeast. His boots rang on the polished stone floors, thoughts full of what and who he would need to bring on the mission. He'd need supplies for the journey, as a full squadron of men and their horses would consume more than the small villages would be able to provide. Tents, wagons, and mounted knights. He thought about the infantry, but the delay in getting them to Morvain in any acceptable time frame wasn't an option. 3 days to the village mounted, over a week by foot. 2. Gawain resisted the urge to doze in the saddle, keeping alert despite the warmth of the spring sun and the cooling breeze flowing down from the hills. The day had been gentle, the sight of the forests and fields coming alive with new growth and bright green leaves enough to soothe the small thread of nerves that ran through his thoughts. They were making good time, and the knights and their combined retinue would reach Morvain in a matter of hours, probably before sunset. He'd sent the scout Sora ahead to alert the village of their arrival. The retinue would camp outside the village at a suitable location, since Morvain was too small to have an inn or stables large enough to hold their animals. A scout, 6 knights, a mage and his mount, their own individual retinues, and the portable smithy slowed the procession, but the royal roads out to Morvain were tended every spring and in decent shape, and their animals were fresh. Fair weather sped them along, and they would arrive able to do their duty with minimal downtime. The sun warmed his armour, and he was thankful he wasn't wearing the full complement of gear. He wore a leather gambesson, padded linen and silk-lined leather trousers with knee-high leather boots, spelled to stay dry to avoid blisters, and a black surcoat with a red dragon flying on a black field. The heavier pieces of his armour were in the wagons. The rest of his knights were outfitted in a like manner. Conflict on the road in this part of the country was unlikely, and they needed to spare their horses the weight, since they would be in the saddle for most of the day. He wore his half-shield strapped to his back by its guage, keeping the cool wind off his shoulders, and his sword and dirk rested in the scabbards on his hips, adjusted to keep the ends from smacking his horse in the sides. A screech from high above had Gawain squinting against the setting sun. A gerfalcon swooped down out of the light and landed on the gloved hand of the mage riding beside him. Skilled in combat magic and battlefield medicine, Tristan de Leon was a formidable, dangerous man, and one of his oldest friends. They were distant cousins as well. Their grandparents were siblings, though Gawain and Tristan looked nothing alike. Tristan favoured Elise more than Gawain did, Gawain inheriting black hair and blue eyes from his mother, and Tristan and Elise favouring the blonder, more golden tones in the hair and skin of the rest of their family. The 3 of them spent their childhoods causing mischief in the castle and the surrounding countryside, at least until Elise's courses in governing became more arduous and Gawain and Tristan went into different vocations. Gawain followed the sword, and Tristan his magic. Tristan pet his gerfalcon with a finger, smoothing down its ruffled feathers. His midnight blue robes fluttered in the wind, his blonde hair lifting from his brow as he settled the raptor, calming it with a few whispered words and a soft touch. "Any news?" Gawain asked, straightening in the saddle. The surrounding hillsides were a mix of thickened strands of trees and brush and rolling fields of lush grass and early flowers. In the far distance, the peaks of mountains were still laden with snow and ice, but in the lower reaches of the range, life was returning. That meant prey animals were increasing in number, and predators along with them. The road was in frequent use from travellers, merchants, and the military, so larger predators kept to the wilder reaches of the looming forest. But there were still some of the more dangerous solitary predators about that could be worrisome, even to mounted knights. Tristan hummed, making eye contact and holding it with the bird for a long moment, before he blinked and rested his hand on the pommel of his saddle, the raptor preening its feathers. Job completed. Tristan dug out a couple slices of rabbit meat from a small satchel attached to his saddle, feeding the bird as he gathered his thoughts. Merlin saw some signs of fire in the higher ranges. Blackened trees, burnt fields. Nothing widespread, though. Just a few isolated spots coming in from over the pass and closer to Morvain. Looks like a trail. A few days old, maybe closer to over a week at the oldest locations. Dragons? Tristan nodded. It aligns with a feeding dragon. The chronicles speak of dragons preferring to burn their kills, eating them charred. Can you sense any magic? Tristan grimaced and shook his head once. Too far away yet. I'll be able to tell you for certain once we get to the village. Keep an eye out, Gawain cautioned, and Tristan clucked to his bird before lightly tossing the raptor into the air. Merlin gave a cheerful-sounding call and swooped away, gaining height and quickly disappearing. Tristan could see through Merlin's eyes, their connection granting him access to the raptor's senses. Gawain looked back over his shoulder and got a nod from Avril and Bedivere, who rode directly behind him and Tristan. Felix and Silpher rode behind them, and Axton brought up the rear, the young man newly knighted by Elise the month before. 3 squires drove the wagons behind the knights, hand-picked from the newest batch of recruits. 2 lasses and a lad, the 3 of them the most level-headed and the least likely to panic. Avril was his most seasoned knight of the 6, and she had the squires well in hand for this excursion. The wind picked up, fluffy white clouds racing across the sky from over the mountains. The banner bearing the red dragon emblem of the royal family snapped and tugged in the uptick. With the wind came the sound of hooves on the packed gravel road, and Gawain lifted a hand to shield his eyes from the sun, seeing a rider round the bend of the road where it curved up into the hills. Tension lifted from his shoulders when he recognized his scout, the young woman's red hair streaming out behind her. He relaxed until she drew closer, her rowan gelding sides heaving as she drew him to a halt and whirled him around to keep pace with his warhorse. Sora was pale and sweaty, and road dust layered her skin and clothing. "My prince! The village!" she gasped out. Tristan tossed him a flagon of water, kept cold by spells, and he handed it over to Sora, who took it gratefully. She drank quickly, stoppered the flagon, then gestured back up the road. "There's been a sighting of the beast. The villagers are talking about going out in numbers and killing it." "Has it harmed anyone?" Gawain asked, even as he lifted his right arm and made a fist, drawing them to a halt. "A farmer's pig went missing in the night, but no people have been harmed since the hunters a few days back. I saw no proof it was a dragon, but the villagers are riled up. A farmer's lad claims he saw the dragon on the edge of a pasture this morning. The farmer is calling for a mob to hunt it down. It's going to be a disaster if they find the dragon." Gawain spun his warhorse around, the stallion snorting, rousing from its lassitude brought on by the warm and sunny day. His knights waited for orders. "Axton, stay with the retinue. Make your way to the village and set up camp. I want things in order before last bail." The young knight nodded, no reluctance showing at missing any action. "The rest of us are heading there now. Sora, swap out your horse. We leave once you're ready." A squire jumped down from the lead wagon and ran back along the string to fetch Sora's spare mount. She dismounted and broke down her saddle, tossing it up onto a bay gelding with long legs and a build meant for speed that Mel, the squire, brought up from the rear. Mere minutes later, Gawain whirled his warhorse around and, with Sora leading the way, took off for the village. 3. Wing drooping, Zephyr whimpered and moved carefully through the underbrush, wishing he could fly. The deep gash on his first wing joint wept blood, and he licked at the wound, hoping it wouldn't tear more and leave a trail behind him. The injuries on his wrists and ankles stung, but they weren't as deep as the cut on his wing. A small bush scraped over the cut as he went deeper into the woods, and he hissed through his fangs, smoke escaping in small puffs. He swallowed back the fire building in his throat, not wanting to give the humans he could hear in the far distance anything to track. His magicks were still depleted, exhausted from his escape and the flight over the mountains, and he only had enough energy to disguise his tracks as he crawled through the damp undergrowth. Belly aching, Zephyr sniffed as he sought a cave or overhang that he could squeeze into and hide. He couldn't manage a full transformation, but if he found a place close enough to his current size, he might be able to make himself fit. Depleted as he was, changing his size by a few degrees was manageable, but he fervently wished that he could pull off a whole transformation. Taking the form of another creature would enable him to hide better than hoping for a cave he could fit within. He needed to conserve his energy, and growing smaller might not be the best idea if he was cornered, but he was running out of options. At least he still had his fire. The rocky cliff face rose out of the trees, and most of the brush fell away. He was losing cover, but his nose picked up the scent of fresh water and moss, and there was a chill emanating from where the rocks piled up at the base of the cliff. He crouched behind a large boulder, twisting his long neck, and his sharp eyes picked up a deep recess in the earth where the ground smoothed out. A faint hint of bear and other small critters came from within, but there were no signs of anything living in the cave, aside from the tiny hints of mice. They were too small to be worth the trouble to dig out, so Zephyr ignored them and pulled back, looking behind him and down the hillside. There was a bit of a plateau at the base of the cliff before the cleared area sloped down into the woods. Brush and some stunted trees grew along the boulders and broke up the shadows. The sun was setting behind the cliff, and the shadows were deeper where he stood than they were a few yards to the side, where the sun still cast down its light. Light glinted off the pond on the outskirts of the village, and he could see the farms and pastures through the trees. He had tried to approach the humans, hoping for someone to help him, but they had reacted in fear. The hungry bear stealing pigs from the farms along the edge of the village wasn't helping. Hunger overrode its instinct to avoid humans, and the livestock was too appealing. Humans had come after him with spears and ropes, and his control was negligible after his long ordeal. When he had been awakened from a fitful doze with a sharp spear in his face, he'd reacted badly. Thankfully, he hadn't killed anyone. But after expending what little energy he had left to stave off the worst of the burns the humans received, the sounds of more humans approaching forced him to run. The villagers wouldn't look kindly on him after nearly killing some of them, even if it was in self-defense. Hoping the humans would still think he was in the woods, Zephyr crawled into the cave, ducking low. He pulled in his injured wing as close to his side as he could, the joint screaming at him, and wiggled until he could turn around. Tail curled around his rear quarters and his wings furled in. He shuffled to the side a bit more and relaxed the injured wing as much as he could, letting it extend and take pressure off the wound. He sighed, a bit of smoke drifting toward the top of the cave. It was a snug fit, but he could lift his head a fair bit and see past the boulders to the clearing outside the cave. Thankful it was big enough and he didn't need to expend magic to make his mass smaller. Zephyr did his best to relax and rest. Hunger ate at his stomach, and he sighed, knowing he would need to leave the safety of the cave once it grew dark to hunt for food. Maybe the bear would return to the cave, and he'd get to fill his belly and take care of the villagers' problem with the same kill. Thinking of meat made his hunger increase, and he lowered his head to the smooth earth of the cave floor. Zephyr stared out through the spaces between the boulders, watching the sky in the far distance, and wishing he was among the clouds racing across the blue horizon. He smelled the humans before he heard them. Opening his eyes a mere slit, since they would reflect the light back from any torches carried by the humans, Zephyr waited. The cave was quiet, but the stone walls and the cliff outside made the humans' calls to each other bounce about the valley, increasing in volume as they drew nearer to his hiding place. Twilight came while he dozed, purple and dark blue hues seeping across the tiny bit of sky he could see. Zephyr curled up as tightly as he could, and tucked his head under his injured wing, hiding his eyes. It didn't sound like they'd found the cave yet, but they might soon. He cursed himself for his foolishness. The villagers might know about the cave and check it. His magic was nothing but a wisp of smoke in the center of his being. Years of being drained of his magics and too few years of developing his abilities before his capture meant his magic was as stunted as his natural physical form, which was smaller than it should be for his age. Managing a transformation into an innocuous creature like a cave bat, or even disguising himself as part of the rocks, was beyond him. Hopeless and despairing of his weakness, he shivered in tense anticipation. Voices grew closer, and Zephyr was faced with an impossible choice. Let them kill him, or kill humans in self-defense. He didn't want to die so soon after gaining his freedom. Gawain drew his horse to a stop next to Sora's gelding, the scout slipping from the saddle and kneeling in the damp grass of the pasture that abutted the tree line on the outside of the village. They were in the narrow space between the fence and the woods, and Avril and Tristan held mage lights aloft, the soft white light gently illuminating the deepening shadows as the sun dipped toward the horizon. Sunset was in mere minutes, and they had just arrived in the village, riding on Sora's heels as they cut through the small village centre and heading for the spot where the pig went missing that morning. The village had been all but deserted as they rode through, small children and older women milling near the square, and small pinpricks of torchlight glinting in the distance amongst the trees, telling them that the mob was out in full force. They had no time left. "Bear!" Sora declared confidently, getting back to her feet and brushing damp earth from her knees. "Paw prints are distinctive. It went through the fence rails, took the pig, and dragged it back out the same way it went in." She grabbed the saddle and swung back up, collecting the reins as her eyes traced the marks in the earth towards the woods. "I bet a month worth of stipends that we'll find the remains a few yards within the tree line." "How did the villagers not notice it was a bear?" Tristan wondered, disbelief in his tone. "I think they'd know what bear tracks look like." "Why bother looking for clues when there's a dragon to worry about?" Avril responded, and she looked out over the forest. "Most of the torches I can see are heading up the ridgeline toward the cliffs. If you were a dragon and needed to hide, where would you go?" "A cave," Tristan answered, and Gawain swore under his breath. They were running out of time. "We need to hurry." Gawain gestured to Tristan, who nodded curtly before closing his eyes and lifting his arms out to his side. The mage muttered softly until his torso glowed with a blinding light, miniature suns the size of apples erupting from him. The tiny balls of white light shot out and up by the hundreds, a wave of soundless flame dancing in the wind before shooting out in front of them in a widening arc through the trees. Shouted curses and startled exclamations came from those hunting in the trees as they returned the forest to daytime brightness. The light flickered among the trees like fire, but the orbs were not made of flame, so the forest was in no danger of becoming an inferno. Tristan dropped his arms and swayed for a second, grabbing the wide wooden pommel and leaning over it as he breathed heavily for a moment. "I can hold the constellation spell for a short while." "Forget the bear," Gawain said to his knights. "Stop the villagers from getting to the dragon." "If the dragon attacks us?" Bedivere asked, face grim. "Hope we have time to talk it out of killing us all," Gawain replied. "Let's go." He guided them into the forest. The tiny suns lit the way, allowing his horse to find his footing and letting them race ahead without fear of their mounts tripping or branches knocking them from their saddles. Smoke from torches wafted into the cave. His pursuers were close. Too close. Zephyr could retreat no farther, and he shook, despairing. He didn't want to hurt anyone, but with his magic depleted, all he had were his fangs, claws, and fire. Humans were easily broken and burnt, and he refused to kill anyone. His end was approaching, beaten with farm tools and stabbed by spears. Unless he ran away. But he was weakened by hunger, and his injuries weren't healing, so he would run until he could run no more, then die where he fell. Dying alone was a horrible way to perish, but it was better than being trapped in a cave and stabbed to death, or dragged back into hell and chained for eternity to a madman. He hoped it wouldn't hurt too badly. As he peered around the edge of his wing, he could see torchlight glowing at the entrance of the cave and shadows of people dancing across the stone. He would make a run for it the first chance he got. A torch was thrust into the cave, and an angry face came into view long enough to see him in the shadows. "The beast! It's in the cave!" Zephyr growled, sharp and menacing, and the human ducked out of sight with a yelp. Shouts echoed from outside, and more humans gathered. It was too narrow for them to charge inside, and the floor sloped. He hoped they didn't have bows or crossbows. His scales would deflect most arrows, but the thin membranes of his wings were vulnerable at this range, and enough rips and tears in them could lead to massive blood loss. A spear came thrusting in from outside, and Zephyr dodged it, snapping his jaws just behind the sharp head, the wood splintering in his teeth. The haft was yanked back, and Zephyr spit out the spearhead, the metal landing with a thunk. A disgruntled human grumbled, and another moved into the cave entrance, peering inside. Zephyr growled, but this man, a broad-shouldered human who smelled of hot metal and fire, just grinned back at him. "Fierce beast," the man said, menace in his tone. "Your skull will look great over my forge. I'm gonna bash your brains in." The muscles in his arms and the scent coming off the thick leathers he wore told Zephyr this man was a blacksmith, and the human reached back for something. A large hammer was handed over, and Zephyr snarled, tensing. The human crouched, almost too big to enter the cave, and he lowered the hand holding the hammer enough that he couldn't swing. Zephyr lashed out with his tail and smacked the human in the chest. He pulled his tail back to avoid a wild swing of the hammer, and the human was knocked back on his arse, coughing a hand to his chest. The hammer fell, the human retching as he struggled for air. Some other humans grabbed the smith and dragged him away from the cave, and Zephyr saw a few people with bows in hand. He was in trouble. He roared, the sound reverberating out of the cave, and the humans cringed back, a couple dropping their bows and running. Zephyr dragged in a deep breath and let out a torrent of flame, sending more people running and shouting. No one was injured from what he could see, and if he kept flaming as they approached, he could keep them at bay for a bit. Not indefinitely, but it bought him some time. 4. Gawain led the charge up the hill, Tristan sending out a wave of bright white orbs ahead of them. Villagers were clustered.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?